Hi everyone, how you doing? Just wanted to hop on, talk a little bit of baseball. Wednesday right now, heading into opening weekend. Just got some baseball fever. Wanted to voice some thoughts, put it out in the world, get some predictions out there, and get a general lay of the land on what I'm thinking heading into this baseball season. For to set the expectation of what I do and don't have the full picture of. Obviously, I'm not in the building every day. Don't go to practice, but I've been to a healthy amount of the fall and spring scrimmages, enough to know what I've seen and get a pretty decent feel, I'd like to say, for the roster and for what to expect out of guys. So just wanted to set that standard level of where I'm coming from. But without any further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into it. Last year, not a bad year, not a great year, solid year one outing for Rob Vaughn as he took the reins here in Tuscaloosa following a season that made a super regional, super great run by the Tide that year, but obviously laden with upperclassmen and a lot of off the field issues that led to Vaughn being brought in. So, year one, a little bit weird kind of look with the roster. Had to turn it over pretty heavily in the portal. A lot of guys that were younger that you were expecting to stay left because of the coaching change. And then obviously a lot of that lineup from the year prior was upperclassmen and draft guys that went on to Major League Baseball or exhausted their eligibility. So last year's group, while not to say a untalented group, obviously not the type of team that I would expect Rob Vaughn to have consistently here in Tuscaloosa. A pretty talented group last year. I feel like every SEC ball club that can relatively compete in this league is, but definitely not a personnel type of roster that I would expect for Rob Vaughn, and I think that shows even in year two here, just with the guys that he's brought in to replace its six spots in the everyday order that are up for grabs. And you can just tell just the kind of players that have Vaughn brought in, just different dudes. Without any further ado, getting into those guys, we'll start with the lineup, and then we'll move to the rotation. Going to go through the lineup, how I expect it to be opening day on Friday, 1 through 9, where everyone's going to line up, and where these guys came from, what their slash line was last year, just to get a feel for who they are before we dive into it a little bit more in depth. So, leading off, I think it'll be Bryce Fowler in right field, transfer from Southern Miss by way of Pearl River Community College. Tore it up at PRCC last year. 419 average, 14 doubles, 11 homers, 4 triples, 24 steals, OPS 1181. Was committed to Campbell, then Justin Hare left to take the Campbell job, and that put him open on the market, and Vaughn was all over it, got him committed almost instantaneously. A really tantalizing piece for the Tide, manning the outfield. Following him up in the 2-hole, Justin LeBron. Shortstop, obviously, you're not going to move him anywhere else. Typically, the standard 3-hole hitter type guy, but obviously a lot of modern baseball has moved towards putting your best hitter in the 2-hole so that he's getting less at-bats with nobody on and 2 outs and put in situations with no runners on, or just a 1-2-3 inning to start. You get more likely a shot to get a hit and put guys on, batting your best guy in the 2-hole. Last year as a freshman, 338 average, 429 on base, 9 doubles, 12 homers, 7 steals, OPS 975. That's all as a freshman in the SEC. Otherworldly talent. We'll get more into him later. Third, I think it'll be Will Hodo. I think he'll DH this year, more so than he plays first, but obviously can play in the field, can give you some time at first base, can give you some time in left if you need. Last year, 263 average, 393 on base, 12 doubles, 11 homers, drew 34 walks, super patient approach at the plate, and OPS 883. In the cleanup spot, I think it'll be Jason Torres, the Miami transfer. Think you'll see him trot out at first base on opening day. Another guy with some Positional flexibility, think he can play either corner pretty well. Obviously, the glove is going to be really plus at first base, which is a traditional, stick a big guy that can't really defend their type of position. But Torres is decently athletic for his size, has a really good glove, so would be a really big-time defensive first baseman. Last year at Miami, lost the back half of the season to injury, but in the games that he played, 331 average, 385 on base, 7 doubles, 8 homers, OPS 914. Reputation with the bat precedes him, underrated defender. In the 5-hole, Cade Snell, the captain for this year's team, was a two-way player for Alabama last year, was a midweek starter, occasionally threw relief on the weekends, and then DH'd in the everyday lineup. This year, he'll trot out in left field. Last year, /324, 9 doubles, 6 homers, and OPS at 896. And then behind him, Garrett Staton, Samford transfer. Think you'll see him play in the hot corner this year on opening day. Last year at Samford, 319 average, 19 doubles, 19 homers, 7 steals, and an OPS at 1023. A really solid bat, fifth-year senior, super experienced, a lot of college ABs. Behind him in the 7-hole, I think it'll be Brady Neal, the catcher, transfer from transfer from LSU. Last year at LSU, split time behind the dish, but in his time, 276 average, 408 on base, 8 doubles, 9 homers, and OPS at 986. Just super talented, really projectable catcher. Just a matter of him putting it all together this year, hopefully with a change of scenery and some more consistent playing time. Behind him in the 8-hole, I think it'll be Brennan Norton. He'll be trotting out there at second base. Transfer from Jack State. Senior this year. Just a dirtbag of a ball player. Super scrappy, undersized guy. Last year at Jack State, 327 average, 9 doubles, 2 triples, 13 homers, 8 steals, OPS 993. And then bringing up the rear in the 9-hole, I think it'll be Richie Bonamolo Jr., transfer from Wabash Community College. I think it's somewhere in the Midwest, I want to say. He'll be in center field for us this year. At Wabash, his final season, 411 average, 20 doubles, 4 triples, 14 homers, 62 steals, and a 1266 OPS. I know he was a guy that last year, part of bringing Bryce Fowler in, if I'm remembering the timing of this correctly, was a bit of insurance on thinking Richie Bonamolo might get drafted and sign in the same vein that I'm drawing a blank on the name of the second baseman that we had, Colby Jones. He's in Atlanta Braves system now. That was supposed to be the second baseman this year by way of junior college that got drafted and signed. But behind them, I think the guys that you primarily see off the bench that won't be starters necessarily on opening day, Coleman Mizell, I think he's your 4th outfielder. I think he's another guy that can give you some time at DH in a pinch. Sophomore, I think he's just a year away from real playing time. I think it was just kind of a matter of bringing Bryce Fowler in, blocking his path to playing time this year just a little bit. But obviously a guy that I'm super high on. I think the staff's super high on. And I would not be surprised if he sees some pretty meaningful at-bats this year. After him, I think John Young Jr., he's likely your first infielder off the bench, gives you flexibility to second, short, third. I think he's absolutely going to be the shortstop of the future behind Justin LeBron, but is a freshman. Definitely a guy that I think will continue to come along as the season goes and see some meaningful at-bats. Could definitely be a defensive replacement late in games should you need. And then finally, I think it'll be Will Platner is your last guy off the bench that I think will see some really meaningful ABs. Good platoon for Brady Neal behind the dish as a right-handed bat versus Brady Neal's lefty bat, which is another thing that I didn't mention going through the lineup. It's a big change in the lineup 1 through 9 this year is a lot less lefty-heavy as it was last year. Last year, it felt like we were trotting out 8 lefties and Justin LeBron at times, but this year it'll be Fowler in the leadoff spot. He's a lefty. LeBron a righty. Hodo a lefty. Torres a righty. Snell a lefty. Staton a righty. Neal a lefty, Norton a righty, Bonamolo a righty. So you're getting a solid mix there. You're not going to go on a run of just straight lefty bats in the way that we did last year, where if you got a left-handed reliever into the game, it was big-time trouble for our lineup, which is a nice change of pace. But yeah, Plattner, a nice right-handed platoon option with Neal behind the dish, a guy that tore it up in the fall and absolutely was probably in line for a little bit more playing time if Luke Vaughn didn't have the injury that shut him down for the season. Now, just with depth concerns, you're kind of forced to lock in Plattner as your reserve catcher behind Brady Neal instead of having the flexibility. But that's just baseball. That's how it goes. But I think in general terms with this lineup, like I just mentioned, the lefty-righty splits, huge improvement over last year, not being so dominant to one side of the plate. I'd say the difference is I don't think there's any guy on this roster that's going to mash, 15-plus home runs in the way that Gage Miller and TJ McCants did. I think the overall power of this lineup is probably a little bit better top to bottom. I think you improve on your power output overall. In right field, you get a big power upgrade. At second base with Brennan Norton, you get a big power upgrade. Behind the dish with Brady Neal, I think that's a pretty solid power upgrade. At short, LeBron putting on more muscle heading into his sophomore season. I think you'll see a little bit more from him as a power output type guy. And then at the DH spot with Will Hodo, I think he's more of a power hitter than what Cade Snell was last year. So I think in general terms, the team might have more top to bottom 1 through 9 power, but you won't have any one guy that steps up to the dish and is, the guy that you think, okay, this is a guy that's going to push, 15 to 20 home runs. I think the gap power of this group 1 through 9 is a lot better than last year. I think it's a lot less, selling out for home runs. I think these are guys that are going to be really comfortable spraying it all over the yard and just doubles down the lines, double in the gap. The speed overall of this group is night and day from last year. Last year, I think you only had 2+ runners in your everyday lineup with TJ McCants and Justin LeBron. Now this year, I think Fowler is a plus runner in right. Bonamolo is a plus runner. That dude's got speed for days. LeBron, obviously, still really fast. Neal, really athletic at the catcher position. I don't think you're going to see him swiping bags, but a guy that can, stretch first to home, maybe on a, double in a way that Matt Gassetti wasn't able to last year. Staten at third, probably not going to swipe too many bags, but definitely a threat to run a little bit more than you'd expect out of a traditional third baseman. And Brennan Norton, scrappy guy, but absolutely can scoot a little bit, might steal some sneaky bags. So I think the speed up and down of this lineup, vast improvement. Defensively, I think there's been a lot of improvement, especially in the outfield. I think Snell is a marginal upgrade over Ian Petrutz in left. Both of them, neither of them the fastest guy. I think Snell's got a little bit less concrete issues than Petrutz did in a slightly better arm, but you wouldn't mistake him for a Gold Glover in left. Bonamolo, not to say McCants was ever bad defensively. He was easily the best defensive outfielder we had last year, but Bonamolo is one of those guys at center field where you're just like, this is a textbook, defensive center fielder type guy. And then Fowler over in right, huge defensive upgrade, really solid arm, really rangy in right. I think really the only two positions where you're taking a hit defensively from last year's roster and you're trading a little bit of defense for offense is second base and behind the dish. Not to say that Norton or Neal are bad defenders. It's just that the guys in front of them with Bryce Evelyn and Matt Gassetti were defensive wizards for their positions. But I think everywhere else you're breaking even or getting better defensively, which goes a long way over the course of a year. And then 1 through 9, just kind of the depth of the order, I think is a lot better this year in terms of, whenever the opposing pitching staff gets through the sixth batter in your lineup, that bottom third of the order last year a lot of times was an automatic rollover into the top half of the order without much of a threat. This year, I don't see that being the case. not in the slightest. I think 1 through 9, there's guys that can hurt you in this lineup. And especially with the speed of this lineup, you definitely don't want to let guys on. And it's going to put more pressure on pitching staffs. So, and beyond that, I think it's a lineup that fits the Rob Vaughn pack mentality offensively a lot better than last year, whereas last year it was, we're going to step in the box, we're going to go station to station, and we're going to try and put it over the wall. This year, I think Alabama's going to have the chance to beat you with small ball, with swiping bags, with moving guys over, playing some situational baseball. I think, it's doubles in the gaps that can rack you up, just double, single, double, single, double, single, to death. And then I think it's, there's still a lot of power there. And I think there's a lot more of, the, hey, we're not going to stack lefties in the lineup in a particular way that we did last year, where your relief option, if you're going to bring in a lefty because you're really worried about, let's say, Bryce Fowler at the top of the order or Will Hodo in the 3-hole, okay, well, you're also going to have to keep him in there for the next righty that comes into the order, whether that's Justin LeBron or Jason Torres. And that's much more of a chess match for opposing bullpens than it was last year with our order. So individually, moving on from the general terms, we'll go 1 through 9. Fowler at the leadoff spot, really tantalizing player. I think you could see him become a guy that just ends up being a draft darling. His scouts really get to look at him. The speed is there, the glove is there, the arm strength is there. There is growing, power output from him. I think he's a guy that could absolutely push for double-digit home runs and double-digit doubles this year out of the leadoff spot. And the only question is going to be, how well does he see the ball moving into SEC play from the JUCO ranks? Obviously, you see a lot of talented pitching at the Mississippi JUCO level. It's, a farm system essentially for SEC talent. You see so many guys out of there work their way into this conference. So you feel a little bit better about him on that front. A guy that's had really good moments in both the spring and the fall. And I think if you get him in the leadoff spot and you put Justin LeBron behind him, with his speed and with the threat of Justin LeBron behind him with a, speedy guy on base, opposing pitching staffs are going to be forced to kind of throw to Fowler and give him some pitches to hit and try and get him out, just being better on the mound. More so than pitching around him and seeing if you can get him to chase, and you're not too worried about the walk if it happens. So I think that'll bode really well for Fowler if he can stick in the leadoff spot. Behind him, Justin LeBron. And one of those things, what can I say about Justin LeBron that hasn't been said? This guy is a future first-round pick, slam dunk, consensus, first or second team All-American at shortstop. Golden Spikes contender. Like, dude's a monster. I think for him this year, it's how does he counter the adjustments that, SEC pitching coaches are going to make to him with a year's worth of tape to study? Do you see him continue to grow and mature at the plate, be a little bit more disciplined at the dish? Do you want him selling out average for power? No. It's just not the player he is. You want him on base. But as he gets older, fills out his frame a little bit more, do you hope to see a little bit more power output? A guy that maybe he starts to push for, okay, maybe instead of 12 home runs, it's maybe flirting with 15 home runs type season. That's probably what you're hoping for. And then defensively, he's a wizard with the glove. He can make any play out there. But occasionally last year, the really easy plays would escape him. I think part of that was he's a freshman last year, starting in the SEC. And then I think the other part of that was the defense around him definitely left a lot to be desired. So there was a pressure that I think he put on himself at times where, he was so worried about making every play because if he didn't, you're not so sure if the next guy can. And that's just not going to be an issue that he runs across this year. So hopefully those easier plays, a lot more relaxed, a lot more easygoing about it. Second year in the league, knows he's got a better defense behind him, to where those plays don't escape him in the way that they did last year at times. Behind him in the 3-hole, Will Hodo, the senior, been in the program for 3 seasons, heading into his 4th. Doesn't happen too much this day and age. Traditional lefty power bat, really patient approach at the plate, draws a lot of walks. I think, last year, I think he was about he was 263 on the year, but I think he was in the 270s in SEC play. If you get him in the 270s in SEC play, you get him, north of, 12 home runs. You keep drawing walks in the way that he has, with hopefully Fowler and LeBron getting on a decent amount in front of him. You end up with a really solid bat out of Hodo, especially if he can just focus on, swinging it, spend more time at DH instead of worrying about, his responsibilities at first base, where he admittedly struggled last year at times defensively. Hopefully you take that off of his shoulders, unlock a little bit more offensively out of him. And this should be his 3rd year seeing really meaningful ABs at the SEC level. So hopefully it clicks, and you see Hodo really have a strong, curtain call season. Jason Torres in the cleanup spot had a really rough fall. Came off an injury from Miami, so it was, a work in progress getting him back. Hadn't seen live pitching in so long, and just kind of got thrown into the fire with it. But it's come on a lot better this spring. I think, as long as he continues that upward trajectory, he'll be in a really good spot. I think this is a guy that, is pretty under the radar nationally, I would like to say. I know he made one of those D1 baseball, top 50 list, for his position, but a guy that I don't think is getting the buzz that he should, just based on the fact that he didn't finish up his season at Miami on the strongest note, and had to get shut down for injury. But a guy that I think is an easy lock to be a middle-of-the-order bat. I mean, the ball just jumps off of his bat when he gets it. I'd be willing to bet that the longest home run hit this year comes off the bat of Jason Torres. There's just no doubt in my mind that he's going to smoke one into the scoreboard. It's the Joe. Really good glove at first base. Really solid defensive upgrade there. And, it's just a matter of a full season of health for Torres and just kind of continuing the trajectory he's been on this spring. Really high on him. I think he's a guy that can obviously – big power, but with his 2 years at Miami as a freshman, in limited ABs, it was, a 400 average. Last year as a sophomore, it was a 330 average. I mean, guy can hit. It's not a sell-out for power, hit, sub 280 type approach. It's, spray it over the yard, but whenever he gets a hold of one, it really goes. So, I'm really high on Jason Torres. Cade Snell behind him, batting 5th. I think a really good spot for him to be in the order. Not your traditional, big power bat is a lefty. I think maybe he picks up a little bit more of a power output than he had last year with his back not bother him as much heading into this season. But I wouldn't expect him to be a guy that's, north of double-digit home runs. I just don't think that's really his approach at the plate. I don't really think that's what his swing's conducive for. It's much more spray it all over the yard, try and send him into gaps. And, with where he's projected to be at in the order, in my mind, I think that's a perfect place for him, especially when you're thinking about this Rob Vaughn pack mentality where everyone's playing a certain role in this system. I think for him to be the guy that rolls you over from the top half to the bottom half of the order, with spraying it across the yard to hopefully drive in some guys that have gotten on base in the top half of the order and just really keep rallies going. I think this is a really good place for him to be. Without him having to worry about pitching, that should help him out with the bat. He was really strong during SEC play last year, to a tune of a 343 average. I think his biggest drawback last year was he would have the issue of getting out in front of off speeds early in the count and just rolling right over it to first base. If he can cut back on that a little bit, that would unlock a lot for him, just to see some more pitches on some ABs. But really happy with Snell being back and where he's at in the order. Behind him, Garrett Staton, the Sanford transfer, biggest shoes to fill on the team, bar none. Gage Miller really was the driving engine of the offense last year in the leadoff spot. Obviously, that's not what we're going to expect Staton to do. Putting the expectation of 350 and, 19 home runs on him is just absolutely unfair. Don't expect him to be Gage Miller at the plate. But, as a guy that hit 319 last year with 19 home runs, if he can flirt with 300, hit, around 12 home runs and play really solid defense at third, and be a, decent base runner, really that's all you can ask for him, as a veteran transfer and for a guy that, you're asking this lineup to be better than the sum of its parts. I think if you get Staton to buy into that role and not feeling the pressure to replicate what Gage Miller did, but rather just be Garrett Staton, he'll have a really solid year, especially in the 6-hole. I really like, where he's settled in is kind of a, you've gotten through, your quote-unquote power alley, with Torres and Hodo, but really Staton, is a guy that I think could absolutely push, for leading the team in home runs, just based off what he did last year. And he's also athletic enough to really, keep some pressure on the base paths while you roll into the bottom half of the order should he get on. So excited about Staton. Really, really excited to see what he will do. In the 7-hole, Brady Neal, really highly touted catcher coming out. Struggled to find, really consistent playing time at LSU. Freshman didn't play much at all. Sophomore year, kind of a platoon thing and never really settled in. One of those things that very different player than Matt Gassetti, very similar path to Alabama as Matt Gassetti, coming from 2 years at a different SEC school and then transferring in to Alabama to really find a home and hope that the change of scenery really makes it click. For Neal, I'm not going to set the expectations, through the moon. I think, OPS in the 900s, 276 average, almost double-digit home runs last year. I mean, if he can just do that over a full season in the 7-hole as a catcher, I'd be more than happy with it. But obviously there's a lot of potential to greatly improve on those numbers just with the pedigree that he has coming in and the raw tools that he has. It wouldn't shock me at all if he really pops and blows that out of the water. Hopefully, batting in the 7-hole where it's a lower pressure spot in the order, unlocks that for him along with the change of scenery. But we shall see. Behind him, Brendan Norton in the 8-hole. God, you're going to love watching Brendan Norton play baseball. You're going to love it. Just an absolute dirtbag, scrappy ball player. Just consummate, guy that plays each game like it might be his last one. And you just see that competitive edge to him. And you love rooting for those guys. You love having those guys on your team. And, Vaughn said it in a couple of his press conferences or, radio hits prior to the season is there's a lot of guys on this roster that were told at a certain point you're not good enough to play at this level, for X, Y, or Z reason. And, that Brendan Norton exemplifies that, is the undersized guy that's, grinded away at a lower level program before getting this shot in his final year of eligibility. He's got a lot of Altuve in him in terms of power out of a undersized, second baseman. I I just can't speak highly enough of the guy. I think he will be, especially if he can stay in this 8 hole in the lineup instead of having to move higher in the order, just really dangerous in this spot. Just super, super scrappy, never going to waste an AB type of guy. And then rounding off the order, Richie Bonamolo at 9. I would not think of him as the traditional 9-hole hitter that any sort of production out of him is gravy. I think the key with Richie Bonamolo is we have a lineup this year with 2 traditional leadoff hitters in Fowler and in Bonamolo. Well, if you want to put Fowler at the top of the order and, Bonamolo at the bottom of the order, well, what that does is it puts so much pressure on an opposing pitching staff when you're rolling through the bottom of the order, and you've got a guy like Brady Neal at 7 who's got, all the power potential in the world and all that prospect pedigree that you could ask for. And then you've got a guy, with Norton that's not going to waste an AB ever in the 8 hole. And you've got Bonamolo in 9 who is going to be a insane threat to swipe bags. You do not want Bonamolo on to roll over into the top of the order. You absolutely don't. And so it's going to put a lot of pressure on opposing pitching staffs when they get around to your 9 hole that they're still worried, about a real threat to get on and what this means if they roll over into the top half of the order and Richie Bonamolo, after a Richie Bonamolo single, and then he swipes second, and then you're worried about him scoring from second, so you end up walking Fowler, and then all of a sudden, oh shit, Justin LeBron's at the dish with runners on first and second, and they're both fast as hell. So that's really what excites me about the role for Richie Bonamolo this year. A not high-pressure spot at 9 in the order, but a spot where whenever he gets on, you're basically working with the top of your order with another leadoff bat, just sitting in the 9 hole. Really exciting potential there with the lineup. And then rolling on, looking at the mound after rolling through kind of the guys that'll come off the bench and the 1 through 9 order and what to expect out of them. On the mound, you're locked in with Zane Adams as your Friday night guy, heading into his sophomore year. Huge summer on the Cape. Absolutely tore it up. He's added some velo, added some muscle, added a changeup that's just filthy, and then has that cutter that works, and then he's still got that hammer of a curveball that just makes you think, holy shit, this is a little Barry Zito on the mound. True 4-pitch mix. Dream, if you had to build a lefty as a pitching coach in a lab, you come pretty close to, that Zane Adams mold of a 4-pitch guy that can really mix it up with, the movement. Why am I blanking on the term? It's the movement profiles. The cutter, is obviously going to have a different movement profile than the changeup. The speeds, all alternate, and every pitch slots into a really good place to where you're not really throwing anything that sits on top of another pitch, if that makes sense. Behind him on Saturday, you're going to have Riley Quick, a guy that has all the potential in the world. Another guy, if you asked a pitching coach to build a righty in the lab, you probably end up with something close to Riley Quick. Just a big dude that throws hard as hell and has a biting, heavy slider to complement the fastball to be his strikeout pitch, and he's got a solid changeup that he can work in with it to keep you off balance. That's better than a show-me pitch, but it's definitely, more of an arsenal that's fastball, slider, and you mix in the changeup to keep guys honest. But coming off of TJ, obviously, you don't want to rush a guy along. You don't want to put too heavy of an expectation on a guy coming off of Tommy John. And then on top of that is a coaching staff, and as, a pitching coach, especially with Quick being in his first draft-eligible year, you don't want to put too much on his shoulders and push him too hard because he's got, more baseball in front of him, no doubt about it. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how he ramps up through the non-conference and into conference play, and how long of a leash does he get. But, man, if he's on, he's on. It has looked impressive in the innings that I've seen this offseason. I mean, it's, fastball bottoms at like 97, and it averages like brushing 98, and he'll run it up to triple digits. And he's still only like 10, 11 months off of Tommy John. And he's throwing that, which is just nasty. And then the slider still has as much bite as it ever has. The changeup still looks really solid. This is potentially not going to be a duo that's talked about in the preseason as a premier SEC pitching, Friday, Saturday night duo. But provided with a clean bill of health and what these guys are fully capable of, it wouldn't shock me at all. At the end of the season, if you look back and statistically, Quick and Adams are top 4, top 5, Friday, Saturday duo in the SEC. And I think that's really a consistent theme through this team, as I think, it's not the sexiest names that pop. There's no, Prager. There's no Hensley. There's, Justin LeBron's probably the only guy that's that big, name in bright lights type of guy, but he's only a sophomore. But everything in this lineup and in this pitching staff feels like when you really look at it, you think, why aren't people talking about this more? Because this is really damn good. And I think it puts Alabama in a very advantageous position, to say the least. But Sunday, that's the day in question. I know that Vaughn talked about Blackwood, Alcock, Bryans, and Fay all being still in contention for that Sunday gig. And still, as of this Wednesday while I'm recording, I'll pull up my phone right now just to make sure that it hasn't broken since I started this. But Sunday hasn't been announced to this point. Let me just double check to confirm that that is still the case. Yeah, still the case. No announcement of the Sunday guy. Personally, of that group, I'd lean towards Faye getting the nod on Sunday. Had a really strong showing in the summer. Really popped as a starter. I think his, pitch mix profiles more as a starter. Didn't profile really as the reliever that he was last year. I think he probably is the guy that you'd most like to really take control of the Sunday job, because I think his potential is probably the highest of the bunch in terms of, as a professional prospect. But I don't think you can complain with any of the guys getting the nod. Personally, I'd like to see Bo Bryans work out of the pen, just because you can't have enough lefties back there, and especially you can't have enough lefties that could give you, multiple innings, as opposed to being a one inning and shut it down type of guy. So I think he'd have a lot of value as a reliever from the left side. But Blackwood and Alcock, I think, if it's really a decision that's up in the air heading into Sunday, you don't make that decision based on one weekend sample size. I think, you give Alcock and you give, Blackwood the midweek starts, and you see who emerges out of this, 4-horse race for the Sunday job whenever. And once that guy emerges, I would like to say you bring the guys that don't necessarily win the Sunday job, provided, knocking on wood, there's a clean bill of health in the rotation, which we haven't had in many years. So I feel like we're owed one. You bring your guys that were competing for the Sunday job and lost out on it into the bullpen. You bring some veteran arms there that, have the stuff that could go multiple innings if you need. And hopefully you can turn over your midweeks to some younger guys, an Anthony Pescier or Connor Lehman come to mind as guys that I'd love to see work the midweek games as starters once we roll into conference play, so that you can bring in a guy like Bobby Alcock or JT Blackwood into the pen, where I think they'll give you much more important and valuable innings. But getting into the bullpen, I think this is the area I expect to have the most improvement over last year. I think last year's bullpen, I don't want to say the guys that we had back there were bad. I really don't think that was the case. I think it was just a matter of the guys that were back there were all too similar in terms of how they profiled, and that's something that Vaughn's really harped on as well, is it was, we're going to bring you a righty. He's going to throw from probably a 3/4 arm slot. He's going to have a low 90s fastball, and there's going to be, maybe a changeup in there, but primarily it's going to be a fastball slider combo. And it's one of those things that on Friday or Saturday, that can work for a little bit. But after a while, you keep showing the same lineup, the same exact type of reliever, they start seeing it like a jugs machine. But this year, I think there's a lot more variety in terms of what we have out of the pen, in terms of arm slots, in terms of velocity, in terms of pitch mix, in terms of kind of just the different movement patterns of like a fastball that sinks or a fastball that rides, that should go a long way. So this year, the main bullpen piece that you lost last year was Alton Davis. I think it was probably better for both parties. I think he should have a really good year at Georgia with a new pitching coach and taking a new approach out of the bullpen. But last year just absolutely didn't have it. Just was all over the place, and you can't really have a closer that's all over the place like that. So you bring in Carson Osmer from Penn. He seems to be the guy that Vaughn really favors heading into this thing to be the closer. He's got this low arm angle out of the righty slot, like it's low 3/4, but it's not a fully gimmicky arm slot. Like, the stuff is legit, and it's coming out of a tough to see arm slot, which could be super valuable. And then it's like low 90s on the heater, and the off-speed stuff just dips and dives. But then if he can change the arm angle. He can go, more over the top into a over the top 3/4, and he can run the fastball up to like mid 90s. So he can jump the velo if he really wants to. And then you also bring in Danny Heights from Penn as well. A big, heavy fastball, big guy. Aiden Finateri comes from Georgia Tech. Kind of similar pitch mix to what I was talking about that was present a lot last year, but he's a guy that's thrown a lot of innings at the ACC level. Really solid pitchability. He's not going to blow you away with the stuff, but he knows how to get some outs. Packy Bradley Cooney, he's transferring in from Campbell. He was the closer there last year. Really exciting arm, really live arm. Expect him to be late inning type of guy. I think ideally you'd like to have, a Bradley Cooney and a Heiberger type that roll you into Osmer on the weekends. I think that's probably where you're at your best. But then returning, you've got Braylon Myers coming in, a guy that's been here for a long time. All he does is kind of get outs. Just a really solid pitcher. Velo's jumped a little bit this offseason. He's gotten out of the high 80s into the 90s a little bit. Austin Morris coming back from last year, a guy that really came on late. You hope to see that kind of continue. Aiden Moza coming back from last year. Similar to Alton Davis, just never really found solid footing. But when he's on, he's great. Hagen Banks, a guy that actually ended up with, I think, got 2 Sunday starts just by way of injury whittling down Sunday guys, and then he got hurt. So Hagen Banks, I think, will get, looks in the bullpen this year. Healthy enough to come out, week 1 if we end up needing him on the weekend or want to, get him some looks. He's thrown some valuable innings in his time in Tuscaloosa. I think he'll have a really solid role in the weekend bullpen. Colson Buchanan, Back there again, a guy that I think struggled to find a consistent role in the bullpen last year, through some midweeks, through some weekends, just constantly, getting jerked around as to what we were asking for him to do. And then Matthew Heiberger, just electric lefty, had this fastball slider combo that it felt like he threw 95% fastball, and the velo's nothing insane, but it just felt like, I don't know if it's the way it moves or the particular way he releases it, but that fastball has a whiff rate that is obscene. So really excited to see is how he develops this year. And then some other guys that you've got, Ariston VC, he's back. He was a reclassified freshman last year, a guy that I think is probably still a little bit away from big weekend innings. I think you just like to see him develop some more consistency on the mound, really learn to pitch more so than to throw, but obviously work in progress as a converted catcher into the mound as a reclassified guy. Don't want to put expectations onto him, but super live arm. Egan Lowry got a really interesting arm angle, very similar to Dylan Ray. Could be fun in a spot, maybe on the weekend if you really notice that a certain righty-righty matchup, this guy can't hit the arm angle. You could possibly see him get the nod there, but I'd like to see him work more midweeks right now while he really settles in. Tate Robertson, a guy that's been with the program for a long time, lefty, a little bit undersized of a guy, doesn't have the velo that I think really tracks for too many weekend appearances, but a guy that I think can get you some solid outs in the midweek. Zach Cottrell, a JUCO guy that's looked really solid this spring. John O. Stevens, another guy that's been in the program for a little bit. And Sam Mitchell, who didn't see a ton of innings last year, but absolutely has some tools and is coming along. I think could all be, factoring into the midweek. And then obviously some more of your freshman guys that I haven't even mentioned, might pop or might redshirt. You just kind of really never know what the plan with those guys are. But I really like the pen this year. I think the guys that are back have had time to develop, which is huge. And I think the guys that have come in all have a pretty clear role they're going to fill. So very excited. And more than anything, I think the real X factor is can we find the consistency out of Aiden Moza that wasn't there last year? Because when he's on, man, he's electric. Like, the stuff is so legit. But he just never found solid footing last year. Last ride for him in college, I mean, this is a dude that's got the type of stuff that scouts love. So the ceiling on him as a reliever is nasty. I mean, this guy can be a come in and shut this shit down type of guy when he's on. And you've seen him operate at that level, but it's just been one of those things that he's hard to trust at times, especially last year, just never found solid footing. So really rooting hard for Aiden Moza this year to really dial it in and get it situated and really have a great curtain call season of college baseball and play like the guy that can be a draft pick that scouts have seen him as. So moving from the roster, let's look at the schedule, kind of get some thoughts on where the Tide's at there. Opening weekend series is going to be Bradley. Then you've got a midweek against Middle Tennessee, who's always pretty tough. Decent early test. Alabama State right after that. And then the traditional second weekend, kind of like tournament type event. Game 1 on Friday is going to be against Coastal, a really solid program. Obviously, recent national champions not too long ago. NC State will be the Saturday game. That's the real, barometer game. I think similarly to last year, whenever it was in Frisco, I think Dallas Baptist was the team that you looked at, where Indiana, I think, is more comparable to Coastal. And it's funny that it worked Friday, Saturday, both of those games, where I think we should beat Coastal, but I think they're a solid team, and if we lose, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I think it's, might make you consider some things. Depends on how that game goes. It's hard to judge baseball on a one-game sample size. I would not recommend doing it. But NC State's, that's the real team where it's like, okay, if we can go in there, we can get Coastal and we can get NC State on Saturday. NC State's, a consensus top 15 preseason team. I mean, that is a good baseball team that they got. And then Sunday, Ohio State. Justin Hare, who was the coach at Campbell, who coached Packy Bradley Cooney, had, Bryce Fowler signed and in the fold. He left for the Ohio State job. I think he'll get Ohio State towards the top of the Big Ten pretty soon, but I think just in year one, a team that we should handle. Then you go into midweek with Jacksonville State. Then you get a weekend series with North Dakota State. Then you go play Jacksonville State again in a midweek. Then you get your first, I'd like to say, real test of a midweek with Troy coming to town. Team that gets a lot of top 25 preseason buzz. Really, really solid test in the midweek slate. And then you get Presbyterian as your final, weekend non-conference series. So out of that non-conference group, and then your final game before SEC play is the yearly trip to Birmingham to play UAB at Regions. I think the weekend series, you can't afford really to drop a game to any of these guys outside of the second weekend tournament. The Bradley's RPI, disaster if you lose one. North Dakota State's an RPI disaster. Presbyterian's an RPI disaster. You can't lose to any of these guys. Granted, it's baseball. Crazy shit can happen in one game, but you've really got to go 9-0 there. I think, the only team in the midweek that, loss doesn't hurt you too bad would be Troy. I'm expecting going into this thing probably to split the midweek series with Troy. Just because it's been so long since it's felt like they've got us, and they're too good for us to just consistently, get 2-0 on them every year. But other than that, I think you've got to go undefeated, on the weekend series and in your midweek games aside from, Troy. Obviously, you'd love to get Troy because you have them at home. That's a game you should win. But then in the weekend series, I think 2-1 is a good target. I think, 2-1 you're happy, 3-0 you're thrilled, 1-2 you're rather upset about, and a sweep is probably pretty disastrous unless something just goes horribly wrong and we get jobbed in all three of those games. I would be very concerned with a weekend sweep there in Jacksonville. But then heading into just the SEC side of things, the slate is pretty brutal. First and second weekend. And then the back, third of it is also pretty rough. But you go at A&M is your first weekend. Then you come home to play Tennessee. You stay home to play Oklahoma. Then you go to Auburn for the second year in a row. You go home with Mississippi State. Then you go to LSU. Then you host Missouri. And then it's at Vandy, home with Georgia, and at Florida to round out the series, round out the SEC, season. For me, I really like, not necessarily I really like that schedule. I think there are a lot easier schedules in the SEC. Obviously, getting A&M on the road is super tough. Getting LSU on the road is super tough. Getting Florida on the road is super tough. Vandy's a challenge on the road. Auburn's going to be a challenge on the road just because it's, Auburn. All of those series are always going to be hyper competitive. So every road series on the docket, shapes up to be a tough one. Vandy's never going to be bad in Nashville. But the home series, I think, getting Tennessee at home, if you're ever going to get Tennessee on the schedule, I think you'd like to have them at home. Oklahoma at home, I think, in their first year in the SEC. I don't think we're their first SEC road trip in week 3, but, really could be a nice welcome to the SEC, fellas, weekend. That's really what you're kind of hoping for, seeing if you can catch them, not really being aware of what they're walking into. Mississippi State at home. you like getting that series away from Duty Noble. Missouri at home. I think it doesn't matter where you play Missouri. You've got to sweep Missouri. That's kind of who they are as a program, but especially at home. And you like getting them at home so that you can realistically feel good about getting a sweep there. And then Georgia at home, to get that end of the year 3, series stretch of Vandy, Georgia, Florida. Personally, I'd love to have gotten Vandy at home. I feel like that series is, a lot easier to manage from home and to feel confident with. But Georgia, a team that could be high variance this year, super portal heavy. So it'll be interesting to see how their season plays out. But they're going to be a really tough get at home. And then Florida on the road to end the year, a team that's bringing a lot back from a really young team last year that really got hot late. Obviously, we're replacing Cags, which is a huge piece, but the rest of that roster is super talented. But going through it, I think my most realistic expectation would be 16-14 or 17-13. I think you either flip the record from last year, which was 13-17, or you get just above 500. Just think this ball club's too talented to go 500 or less. I think the real questions are, going to be answered in weeks 3 through 5. And let me explain what I'm saying. Because you open at A&M. You hope to get one there. Maybe you're in a situation where A&M sitting there thinking, okay, we're A&M. We're the consensus preseason number 1. We've got a team picked in the bottom half of the SEC coming to town to open conference play. We should handle this. And you catch them asleep and you scare them for a series. Because this is what I think about this team is on a season-long sample size, are we as talented as A&M, as LSU, as Tennessee? No. It's just not the case. Top to bottom, they've just got more talent across that roster. But on any given weekend, is this roster talented enough and built in a way where you can beat anyone on any given weekend? Absolutely. And I think that's the key piece is I think ideally you go in, you scare the shit out of A&M. You'd love to punch them in the mouth and win a series, make a huge statement. But if you can get out of there 1-2, play 3 competitive games or play 2 competitive games and get one of them, I think you're pretty happy. Then you bring it home to Tennessee. We were the only team in the country last year to beat Tennessee in a weekend series. No one else could pull it off against the eventual national champions except for us. Could you replicate that? You'd love to. Realistically, I think the expectation should be, the same as A&M. Get one, bare minimum. Avoid the sweep. Make it a competitive series. But if that's your opening slate for SEC play, well, that means, what I'd expect is to come out of your first 2 weekends 2-4, which sounds bad, but the roughest part of your schedule's in the rearview mirror. So the question that I think gets answered in weekends 3 through 5 is, how do you respond? And can you start climbing out of that 2-4 hole with 3 series that you should be absolutely winnable? If you make it out of A&M and Tennessee at 2-4, I think you feel solid. You don't feel like the sky is falling. But, it's workable. Your schedule's still in front of you. If you're 1-5, I'd be a little bit worried. And that's the real question is if you do get punched in the mouth and you get swept in one of those series and you only get one out of the other, in your 1-5, can you right this ship in the next 3 weekends? Can you really batten down the hatches and rally, or does it all just start to fall apart, as soon as it began? But, on the other side, if you really surprise some people, you come out of A&M and Tennessee at 3-3, you took one of these series, that's gravy. You're playing with house money. Getting out of the hardest, 2-weekend stretch of your schedule at 500, that's massive. Shit, you get out of it 4-2, I'm buying a ticket to Omaha and booking, the time off from work and saving up the gas money to drive over there right now. But I think realistically 2-4. That's what I expect. So then you get Oklahoma at home. I think the front end of their pitching staff's, too talented to sweep them, especially even Sunday. If Cam Johnson, the LSU transfer, if Skip Johnson can unlock him as a player, I mean, that might be one of the nastiest weekend rotations in the league. So I wouldn't expect to sweep them, but I think you get them at the Joe, you should pick that series up, 2-1. So you start climbing out of that hole. You go to Auburn. I think that series is, just a disaster. Do not get swept. But I think, if you get one of the games and the series is competitive, okay, you can live with it. But ideally, I think you get two. I think it's a series that a lot of our guys felt we should have won last year. I think there's a lot, coming back, especially on the pitching side from last year, that has a really bad taste in their mouth about that series. And I think that we go out and we win it. I think we get that series 2-1. And then you come home to Mississippi State, and all of a sudden you're sitting at 6-6 in conference play. You've broken even after your 2-4 start, and it's okay. Let's roll. You get Mississippi State at home. I think you can get that series 2-1. So, bam, you're sitting over 500. You go to LSU. That's a nasty roster. That's a nasty team. I think the objective with LSU is you pick up one game. You avoid the sweep on the road. And if you avoid the sweep, you're happy. Then you get Missouri at home. That's a must sweep. If you want to be over 500 in this league, you get Missouri at home, you've got to take care of business. They have to be swept. And then you go to Vandy. Vandy's not a team that I'm necessarily as high on into this year. I think Vandy is a gettable series on the road. Just because I think, they don't have the bats in the lineup that truly scare me. And I don't think the arms are so, Arkansas-like that it's like, it doesn't matter if they hit. They're still going to, win the series because their arms are that damn good. I think Vandy's gettable. I think you get one game out of it at minimum. Ideally, you get two. Is a team that's beatable on the road. Georgia would not be the most disastrous series to lose at home if it's 1-2. But I think similar to Auburn, there's a lot of a bad taste in the mouth of guys that are back from last year and the coaching staff of, that Georgia series and just how it went. That I think, fuels a series win. I think you get them 2-1. And then at Florida, I think, I think you get one out of that series. I don't think we get swept there. And my biggest thing with this year's team is I don't see us getting swept anywhere because I feel like the talent on the front end of the mound is just too much for us to really come out of a Friday, Saturday 0-2. I just don't see that happening this season. I just don't see a weekend where Adams and Quick can't get it done. One of them on Friday or Saturday. So, ideally, 17-13 is probably my most realistic expectation. I think there's upside to, 18 wins on the schedule, I think. And I think there's downside to 14. So I think your range of expectation is 18-12, 14-16, but I think your most likely outcomes are 16-14 or 17-13, and that puts you right in the thick of it to be in the conversation to host regional. That puts you right in the thick of it to be in a conversation to where even if you're not hosting, you're a strong 2 seed and you're the type of team that no one wants to see in their regional. And I wish that I could bet against some of these projections because Warren Nolan is really the only place that I know of where you can go ahead and get some numbers preseason for baseball. And his projected RPI for us is finishing the year at 37 and an 8-22 record in conference play. And I just don't see that at all. I think the priors of that and whatever's going into it just severely underrates this team. I'm really excited. I think this team's got a lot of a chip on its shoulder, especially in the way that it's being discussed nationally as a, bottom half of the SEC, bottom third of the SEC type team, when in reality, I don't think that's at all the case. And I think this team will go out and surprise a lot of people. And it's going to begin, with the series against Bradley. So that's really all I've got to say about it. And I'll see y'all opening day, I suppose. Roll Tide.